Imagine sitting at a high-stakes poker table where the chips aren't money, right? They're the fate of entire nations.
Right.
And you're sitting there looking at your opponent, and they're holding their hand trying to bluff while their own house is literally on fire.
Just completely burning to the ground.
Exactly. It's like a massive corporate boardroom struggle. Like, imagine a company going through a hostile takeover, right? Half the board wants to negotiate a merger just to save the company, save the employees.
Yeah, just keep the lights on.
Keep the lights on. But the other half, they want to, like, burn the building down just to spite the competition.
They'd rather rule over the ashes.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, have you ever been stuck in a situation where two sides are so deeply entrenched that logic just completely goes out the window?
Oh, absolutely. And that corporate analogy, it captures the precise mechanical failure of what we're looking at today. Because you can't reason with an entity that has fundamentally split its core objective like that.
Right.
The basic assumption of international relations is state survival. But when the leadership of a nation completely separates its own personal survival from, the economic survival of the state itself.
All the normal rules just break down.
Exactly. The traditional levers of diplomacy, like sanctions, economic incentives, even military threats, they just completely misfire.
And that misfire, that total breakdown of leverage, is basically the beating heart of today's deep dive. We are unpacking this really fascinating, super high-stakes strategic briefing from a recent Fox News broadcast.
Yeah, it's a really dense piece of analysis.
It is. The segment features General Keane, and he's breaking down the mechanics of international leverage, military brinkmanship, and this explosive internal power struggle happening right now in Iran.
And we should clarify right up front for everyone listening, our goal here is to objectively map out the strategic claims and the military logic presented in this specific transcript.
Right, exactly.
The broadcast includes, very explicit assessments of U.S. strategy, critiques of past administrations, like referring to the 2018 nuclear agreement withdrawal as escaping the, quote, Obama bad deal.
Yeah, they use some very strong language in the source.
They do. And stark characterizations of Iranian leadership. So to be clear, we're not endorsing these viewpoints, and we're not taking any political sides.
Zero political sides here. We're just looking at this as a masterclass in understanding how this one specific viewpoint models the conflict.
Right. We're just reporting the framing.
Right. And as we dig into this geopolitical chess match, we are building up to a really critical, fast-approaching deadline. And tied to that deadline is this historical event that the source calls the Midnight Hammer.
Oh, the Midnight Hammer.
It completely redefines the stakes of everything we're about to talk about. But before we drop that hammer, we really need to understand the boardroom brawl happening inside Iran right now.
The suits versus the guns.
Yes, the suits versus the guns. General Keane's analysis points to this massive internal power struggle. So, who exactly are the guys in the suits?
Well, according to the broadcast, the primary avatar for the suits is the Iranian parliament speaker,
Ghalibaf.
Yeah. And he's an interesting figure because he's not just some civilian pacifist, right? He has a deep background as a general in the military.
Oh, really? Okay.
But in his current political role, he basically represents the diplomatic face of the nation. The source notes that historically he's shown a somewhat pragmatic streak.
Like a willingness to actually make a deal.
Exactly. He's shown he can make compromises. He represents the faction that realizes, hey, the state is collapsing. We need to negotiate this merger to save the corporation.
But staring him down from the other side of the table are the guys with the guns, right?
Right. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
And according to the Fox News report, the IRGC is currently consolidating power in a way that just actively sidelines the politicians like Ghalibaf. The source actually describes them as the hardline radicals who have terrorized the world for decades.
Yeah, they don't mince words.
No, they don't. And what really caught my eye in this briefing is the specific mention of the new IRGC chief. This is a hardliner who is directly connected to the legacy of Qasem Soleimani.
That is the critical data point right there.
Why is that so huge?
Because Soleimani wasn't just a general. He was the architect of Iran's entire asymmetrical proxy network. He built the system that lets them project power without engaging in traditional state-on-state warfare.
Oh, I see. So it's not just a promotion, it's a signal.
Exactly. By putting a successor deeply embedded in that specific hardline strategy in charge right now during an internal crisis, the IRGC is sending a massive signal. They are rejecting the pragmatism of the politicians.
So they're totally disagreeing with Goluboff's willingness to make concessions.
Right. They're prioritizing ideological purity over, economic relief.
Okay, but let me challenge that premise for a second. If you're negotiating with the U.S., isn't it kind of a smart move to project a fractured front?
What do you mean?
Like, is this a real ideological civil war? Or is it just a massive, coordinated, good cop, bad cop routine to confuse the U.S. negotiators? Like, you send the guy in the suit to smile and demand concessions, while the IRGC chief stands in the background racking a shotgun just to increase leverage.
It's a fair question, because that tactic is definitely a staple of statecraft. But General Keane's analysis really dismisses the idea that this is just theater.
He thinks it's real.
He views it as a highly genuine, deeply dangerous rift. In the broadcast, he explicitly says, "I think what we are witnessing right before our eyes is a power struggle inside of Iran. I think they are really at odds."
Wow.
And the implications of that are massive, because if their command structure is actually splintered while they're facing overwhelming foreign military pressure, the U.S. isn't just negotiating anymore.
They're basically waiting to see who actually has the authority to sign the paper.
Exactly. The resolution of this internal debate is going to completely dictate Iran's next move on the global stage. Do they step up to the table, or do they prepare for war?
Imagine trying to negotiate with a country that literally can't even agree with itself on who is holding the steering wheel.
It's impossible.
And when that internal diplomacy fails, the source suggests the U.S. strategy shifts entirely to external crushing pressure. Which brings us to the ticking clock.
The Wednesday ultimatum.
Yes. The broadcast introduces this very rigid ultimatum. There's a ceasefire currently in place, but it ends on Wednesday. And the host makes a super deliberate point of emphasizing that timeline. They say, by the way, it is Wednesday, not Tuesday, that it ends.
Specifying Wednesday is important because it removes that ambiguity that usually plagues international red lines, right?
Yeah, it's not just some vague threat anymore.
Right. It transitions from a diplomatic warning to a concrete operational timeline. And the consequence of ignoring that deadline is what General Keane calls a return to, quote, absolutely full throttle combat operations.
Full throttle. And the briefing gives a pretty stark assessment of what that actually means. Because according to the source, the U.S. currently has twice the military capability in the theater than it did when the conflict started.
Yeah, let's unpack that, because twice the capability is easy to just hear as a throwaway statistic.
Right. It's not just a few extra tanks.
No, we are talking about compounding force projection, carrier strike groups, stealth fighter squadrons, the early warning radar networks, and, most importantly, the logistical tail required to keep all of that fueled and armed.
And that ties into a really specific kind of terrifying advantage highlighted in the text, which is that the U.S. has full magazine depth.
Yes.
The broadcast sharply contrasts that with reports that Israeli forces are dealing with ammunition shortages. So what does full magazine depth actually mean in this context?
It dictates the entire tempo of a conflict. If a military is facing localized shortages, they have to ration their strikes. They have to constantly calculate the return on investment for every single precision-guided munition.
Like, is this target worth the missile?
Exactly. But operating with full magazine depth means the U.S. supply chain is essentially unconstrained in that theater. They have the runway to sustain a massive shock and awe campaign without worrying about inventory.
So it's signaling to the IRGC that if the U.S. starts a kinetic campaign, it's not going to just burn out in a couple of days because they ran out of bombs.
Precisely. The threat of full throttle is backed by an endless supply of hardware.
Okay, but this brings up a massive contradiction in the text that I really want to reconcile.
Okay, what is it?
Early in the broadcast, the host says very clearly, if we are very blunt and honest, the easiest path would be to wipe them out, obliterate them. But the reality is the president really deep down does not want to do that to the Iranian people. He applauds the president for going the extra mile to spare civilians.
Right.
But then, just moments later, they are promising considerably more dramatic combat that targets everything the president mentioned, and then some, at full throttle.
Yeah.
How do you square a desire to spare civilians with an unconstrained, full-throttle combat threat?
Well, General Keane's analysis touches on this core paradox of modern deterrence. It's the difference between counter-value targeting and counter-force targeting.
Counter-value versus counter-force. Break that down for me.
Sure. Counter-value targeting is, the obliteration of cities, destroying the civilian populace to break a nation's spirit. The broadcast is clear that the U.S. president actively rejects that.
Right.
The full throttle threat is purely counterforce. It's the surgical, systematic dismantling of the regime's power base. We're talking about targeting the IRGC's command centers, their drone factories, their air defense networks.
So it's basically the threat of decapitating the military apparatus but trying to leave the civilian infrastructure intact?
Exactly. It's a massive display of leverage designed specifically to force the suits to overrule the guns.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, by demonstrating this undeniable capacity to just dismantle the IRGC with bottomless magazines, the U.S. is giving Galibaf the ultimate leverage in his internal boardroom brawl.
The politicians can turn to the hardliners and say, look, if you don't let us negotiate by Wednesday, the U.S. is going to erase your military, and you'll have nothing left to command anyway.
Exactly. The military threat is the hammer waiting to fall.
But what the source outlines next is the vice they are already trapped in. We have to pivot from the military hardware to the economic ledger, because the statistics Fox News provides on the Iranian economy are just staggering.
They are completely bleak.
The broadcast cites an inflation rate of 180%.
Let that sink in. 180%.
It's wild. They describe the national currency as completely worthless, and they report that 50% of the Iranian workforce is currently unemployed.
An economy operating with those numbers is not functioning. It is actively imploding.
Right.
The velocity of money just breaks down. Citizens are forced into black markets or barter systems just to get basic food, capital flight accelerates, and the state loses the ability to even finance its own basic operations.
And the true leverage point the briefing identifies isn't just that domestic inflation, it's the total constriction of their macroeconomy. The broadcast states that the primary leverage the U.S. holds going into negotiations is the total shutdown of Iranian exports.
Including oil, which is massive.
Right, a complete blockade on oil and everything else. The text notes that these exports traditionally account for 80% of the nation's total revenue.
80%.
Think about that household analogy. Imagine your household loses 80% of its income overnight. Half your family loses their jobs. The price of groceries nearly triples.
You'd be panicking.
You'd be begging for a financial lifeline.
Right.
So why aren't they? Why isn't the regime sprinting to the negotiating table?
This leads perfectly into the psychological analysis of the regime that General Keane provides. Because if you apply the logic of a normal, democratic leader accountable to their citizens, their behavior makes zero sense.
It's totally irrational.
Right. But the broadcast explicitly argues that the hardliners do not operate on that logic. The source says plainly they don't care about their people, they care about personal survival, regime survival.
Yeah.
That is it.
Wow.
The IRGC has built this massive parallel black market economy over decades of facing sanctions. They control the smuggling routes, the ghost fleets moving illicit oil.
So wait, while the baker in Tehran is suffering under 180% inflation, the IRGC general is completely fine.
Exactly. He still gets his paycheck, his security, his imported goods. They are insulated from the macroeconomic rot.
Insulated but not immune, right?
Exactly, not immune. The U.S. strategy of forcing an economic collapse, which the source notes is, quote, on the horizon, isn't designed to make the leadership feel empathy for the starving populace.
He said they won't.
Right. It's designed to starve the beast itself. Cutting off that 80% revenue stream pushes the state to a mathematical breaking point where they literally cannot afford to pay their internal security forces anymore.
Or fund their proxy networks.
It's exactly. General Keane notes, the threat is less about their weapons and more about their future, their economic viability.
So the U.S. is just squeezing the oxygen out of the room until the hardliners suffocate.
That's the plan.
But despite the 80% revenue block, and the military literally parked on their border with full magazines, the hardliners are still bluffing.
They are.
The source dives into the psychology of this bluster. According to the broadcast, the IRGC genuinely believes that the U.S. president will not go completely to the end of it.
They're banking on U.S. fatigue.
Right. They think political and economic pressure within the United States is going to force the U.S. to end the conflict prematurely.
It's a high-risk gamble based on asymmetrical resolve. The hardliners calculate that the American electorate just doesn't have the stomach for a protracted, messy engagement in the Middle East.
They think we'll just get tired and go home.
Yes, exactly. They view Western democracies as inherently casualty-averse. They believe if they just absorb the initial blows and stretch out the timeline, the U.S. will withdraw. and Iran retains its leverage just by surviving.
The Iranian speaker even went public claiming they have new cards to play against the U.S.
Right, which the broadcast dismisses as quintessential propaganda and bluster.
Yeah, I mean, if you're holding a losing hand, why bluff against someone who has double the chips and a track record of calling bluffs? It seems completely irrational.
General Keane actually calls it absolutely reckless thinking. He describes their worldview as a vision of diabolical thinking. But you have to look at it from the perspective of an ideological zealot.
Which is?
Survival in the ashes is still a victory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as the text states, if he survives in his mind, he wins. They don't view a decimated infrastructure as a defeat, as long as the regime remains the ultimate authority over whatever is left.
Okay, so this is the critical juncture of the entire deep dive. How does the U.S. counter a regime that views systemic destruction as an acceptable cost of doing business? How do you break a psychological bluff that relies on American fatigue?
This is where we get to that big reveal you teased earlier.
The midnight hammer.
Yes. The broadcast drops this historical parallel that completely reframes the entire military threat.
The host lays out the numbers explicitly. He says, after 14 bunker buster bombs, that war ended in 12 days. Midnight hammer. Let's just focus on the mechanics of that for a second. 14 bombs, 12 days. That is not a decade-long occupation.
No, it's instantaneous paralyzing shock.
Explain why that is so terrifying to a regime like this.
To understand it, you have to understand the mechanics of deep penetration munitions. Bunker busters. Regimes like Iran spend billions burying their most critical command nodes, their nuclear centrifuges, their elite leadership bunkers deep inside mountains.
Right, heavily reinforced concrete.
Right. They do this assuming they can weather a surface-level bombing campaign. But a bunker buster uses sheer kinetic energy and a delayed fuse to penetrate dozens of feet of earth and concrete before it actually detonates inside the facility.
So when the host talks about 14 bombs ending a war in 12 days, they are talking about basically decapitating the entire nervous system of a military in less than 2 weeks.
Precisely. If you destroy the subterranean communication hubs, the commanders can't talk to the missile silos. The political leaders can't coordinate the air defenses. The entire military apparatus just fractures into blind, isolated units.
So the broadcast is using this midnight hammer reference to ask a rhetorical question to Iran. Why would the U.S. worry about political fatigue if they have the specific weapons to permanently paralyze your entire command structure in under a fortnight?
Exactly. It completely bypasses the war of attrition they are banking on.
And the host follows up that historical reference by questioning the Iranian calculus directly. He says, I'm trying to understand, after all that President Trump has done here, how they can doubt in any way, shape, or form his resolve to do the hard way if he has to.
Right. And that resolve isn't just about dropping bunker busters. It's also diplomatic ruthlessness.
Yeah, the source points out that the U.S. president is willing to negotiate, but he's not going to put up with a bad deal. And the historical proof they give is the U.S. withdrawal from the 2018 nuclear agreement.
Which the broadcast frames as walking away 3 years into the Obama bad deal.
The mention of that 2018 withdrawal is super strategic in this context, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It serves to completely dismantle the Iranian hope that the U.S. is just desperate for a diplomatic win.
By reminding them that the U.S. will actually just walk away.
Right. Reminding the leadership that the current U.S. administration has a proven track record of tearing up agreements they deem insufficient. It removes the incentive to stall.
General Keane emphasizes that the U.S. is entering these negotiations holding a lot of cards in our hand, actually a stronger hand than we had in the last negotiations.
Yes, the leverage is heavily tilted.
So we have mapped out the entire board here.
We really have.
We have the suits and the guns locked in this boardroom brawl. We have a Wednesday deadline backed by twice the military capability, bottomless magazines, and the looming threat of the midnight hammer.
Yep.
We have 180% inflation and an 80% revenue blockade just suffocating the state. And according to the briefing, this all converges on a rapidly closing decision window. General Keane estimates they have, 12 to 20 hours to make the ultimate calculation?
Yeah, 12 to 20 hours. And in that window, the source outlines basically the two distinct paths forward for Iran.
Okay, what's path one?
Path one requires the internal power struggle to resolve in favor of the pragmatists. The suits empower Galibaf, they accept the reality of the U.S. leverage, they abandon this idea of testing the president's resolve, and they go to the negotiating table.
Prepared to actually accept strict controls in exchange for economic survival.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the logical path.
And path two is the catastrophic alternative.
Right. The IRGC hardliners win the internal debate. They decide their ideological purity is worth the gamble. They test the U.S., blow past the Wednesday deadline, and accept a return to devastating full-throttle combat operations.
Risking the complete structural collapse of their own nation.
Yeah. When you lay out the overwhelming leverage the U.S. holds, the economic chokehold, the unconstrained logistics, the willingness to walk away, the bunk buster's path to defies all conventional strategic logic.
It really does.
General Keane points out that the U.S. negotiators understand this, the president understands this, and he suspects even the upper echelon of the IRGC recognizes the fatal mathematics of their position.
The sheer weight of these overlapping pressures is just. It's a masterclass in brinkmanship. You have the military parked on the border holding a sledgehammer, macroeconomic rot hollowing out the country from within, political fractures paralyzing the leadership.
But there is one final variable the source text brings up at the end.
Right, this profound hope expressed by the host regarding the internal rot.
Exactly.
They suggest that the Iranian people, the citizens who are actually bearing the brunt of the inflation and the worthless currency, might basically weaponize their frustration.
The hope is that the populace will wake up and force a massive internal change before the Wednesday deadline forces the bombs to fall.
It's the ultimate wild card in any authoritarian regime, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The leadership might insulate themselves from the economic pain, but if half the workforce is unemployed and money is useless, the state loses its monopoly on order.
Yeah, the broadcast is basically hoping the internal pressure cooker explodes upward, forcing the hardliners to capitulate not because they fear American bunker busters, but because they fear their own starving citizens overwhelming the palace gates.
If the leadership refuses to care about the people, maybe the people finally decide they don't care about the leadership's ideological goals.
Wow. I mean, we have covered immense ground today, unpacking this staggering, high-stakes internal tug-of-war between politicians seeking a lifeline and radicals willing to rule over ashes.
It is a dense, tense situation.
We analyzed the logistics of a Wednesday deadline, the unconstrained U.S. military logistics, the terrifying historical precedent of the Midnight Hammer.
The mechanics of economic annihilation.
80% of the lifeblood choked off. 180% inflation. It is a geopolitical pressure cooker, and the timer is rapidly running down.
It really is.
Now, we want to turn it over to you, the listener. We want your strategic read on this situation. If you were sitting at that negotiating table, holding the overwhelming hand of cards we just analyzed, what would your next move be?
Do you drop the hammer on Wednesday, or do you let the internal economic collapse do the work for you?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this granular breakdown, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you these deep dives into the mechanics of global conflict.
And as we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought based on the profound psychological disconnect we discussed today.
Go for it.
When a nation's leadership becomes so entrenched in its own ideological bluster that it completely divorces its own survival from the basic caloric survival of its citizens, at what exact moment does the real existential threat stop being the superpower waiting at the border and start being the hungry, jobless populace waking up inside the gates?
It really forces you to rethink that boardroom analogy, doesn't it? Maybe the opponent isn't staring you down to intimidate you. Maybe they are staring at you because they are absolutely terrified to turn around and look at the fire they started in their own house.
That's a great way to look at it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.